There's trouble in paradise, folks. BBC Radio 5 Live, which is basically Radio 4 for people that got a 2-2 at university, has seen two of its biggest stars suffer a bitter falling out in a row which has rocked the network. Now, this popular channel, which boasts 7 million listeners a week, and which, in my view, largely does a good job, though it is the BBC, so it's a low bar, well, it's seen its presenting lineup on the drive time show between 4 and 7 p.m. thrown into absolute disarray, as hosts Tony Livesey and Claire McDonnell came to blows after he insulted her by email. Now, the Sun newspaper report that Livesey accidentally sent his co-host the email, which was intended for someone else and which was critical of her presenting skills. Now, this is a surprising oversight from Livesey, given that prior to broadcasting, he was the editor of a national newspaper, although it was the Daily Sport, so let's not get carried away. The Sun reports that Claire has, and I quote, refused to work with Livesey ever again. How the other half live, eh? Welcome to the pampered world of BBC presenters bankrolled by the taxpayer. If only you and I had the ability to go on strike and decide who we will and won't work with. Luckily, when I co-present, I get to work with the likes of the sensational Bev Turner. But of course, 5 Live can't afford someone of her calibre. Since this nuclear bomb exploded, the pair have been presenting the drive time show on alternate days, reportedly so that they don't have to be in the same studio at the same time. Give me strength. Now, unfortunately, poor old Tony, a natural broadcaster and an outstanding journalist, seems to have come off worse following the fracas. It seems that notwithstanding the huge following that he's built on drive time over many years, he's going to be shunted to the late-night graveyard slot. An insider has told The Sun, Claire is happy. She was listened to by station bosses and thinks Tony has got exactly what he deserves. Of course, Tony looks to be the fall guy. You would expect nothing else. He's a middle-aged bloke, persona non grata at our national state broadcaster. Why? Well, because Tony doesn't tick any boxes, does he? This is the same BBC radio management who were painfully slow to offer the legendary Ken Bruce a new contract, even though he hosted the #1 radio show in the whole of Europe. In spite of Ken Bruce's eye-wateringly large, record-breaking audience, he was on half of the wages of his hip, younger colleague Zoe Ball and wound up having to find a gig on commercial radio, where he's taken much of his audience with him. As a man in the autumn of his years, Ken didn't tick any boxes either, did he? Now, there are some stellar talents on 5 Live, particularly the station legend Nicky Campbell, who pretty much reinvented the phone-in format single-handedly. But 5 Live is not without previous controversy. Enter stage left Nihal Arthanyika, who caused a huge storm in November of last year when he said that working with white people was affecting his mental health. Speaking at the Journalism Diversity Fund conference, or as I like to call it, the Woke Olympics, he said an overwhelmingly white working environment was impacting his psychological well-being. He said, it's really affecting me that I walk in and all I see is white people. Nihal, I agree with you. I've got a couple of whites on my team and I'm not happy. They're not for me. They eat weird food and they won't integrate. Absolute wrong uns, thanks, but no thanks. Now, whilst Mr. Arthanyika raised valid concerns about the workplace being diverse, and that's a policy that, joking aside, I do support, can you imagine the uproar if a broadcaster that was not of colour made these remarks about ethnic colleagues? Well, it would be career over, and rightly so. But not at the BBC, where prejudice rules, as long as it's in the name of diversity. Now, unfortunately, the cracks between Tony and Claire appeared long before Tony's email fail. The Sun have unearthed a clip in which Claire is pretty rude to Tony on air, and he doesn't see the funny side. Take a listen.
They are uber professional. It's a privilege to sit alongside
them. Good to work alongside professionals for a change. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Right, everyone's having a go now. What's happening? Right.
Oh, that was an open goal.
I'm going to say the time dramatically and hope everyone's forgotten what's just been said. It's 5:33.
Yikes. In the increasingly woke world of BBC radio, dusty middle-aged blokes like Tony Livesey will continue to get sidelined. After a row with a younger female colleague, he's the one that's got to walk away, even though he made that slot his own. His loyal audience will find that a big turn-off. Maybe we should give him a job here. Worth adding that I think Claire McDonald is a great broadcaster too. I think they're both good. It's a shame they can't make it work, but in this pampered world of BBC broadcasting, they get to pick and choose, and they can have rows and go on strike. Different rules if you work at our national state-funded broadcaster. Your reaction, please, gbnews.com/your say. Should Tony Livesey keep the drive time gig? I'm going to start a campaign and say, bring back Livesey. He should be doing that show. There you go. Let me know your thoughts. What does this drama tell us about the state-funded BBC? First, tonight's top pundits. We have titan of entertainment journalism, Nina Mishkov, the former executive editor of the News of the World, the one and only Neil Wallace, and the fearless political commentator, Fleur Elizabeth. Nina, you've seen dramas like this in the world of showbiz over many years. Does this story surprise you?
Not in the least. Not in the least. You know, it's that old cliche of let's put a man and a woman together. You know, it's always an older man, it used to be older man and a younger woman, and they just have to get on with each other and get on with it. And by the way, I've never listened to them because I never got a 2-2. I didn't actually graduate, so there we go.
No, you're too clever for Five Live. You're probably World Service level, I'd say.
I would say Times Radio is my natural
Please don't
home.
swear in the studio.
Yes.
Anyway, so. This is just the way of the world. You know, the pendulum has swung, and it hasn't swung back far enough to the centre. You know, decades ago, men were in charge and women were very much secondary, and they just had to take what crumbs they could get and put up and shut up.
When you entered Fleet Street in the 70s, the 80s, very sexist environment.
A very sexist environment. And I have to say that environment was actually one of the least sexist places, because if you could do it, if you could do the job you were in,
You got respect.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, there are lots of sexist things about it, but let's not quibble about that. But when I was working on Jackie magazine, which was the big teenage magazine of the time, up in Scotland, biggest publishers in Europe, DC Thompson. And I had worked on the magazine for 8 years, and the editor left. Well, the editor went up as big managing editor. And there were kind of two of us, although I never put myself forward or anything like that, there were two of us that were kind of up for the job. And I was called in and they said to me, we're going to make him the editor. We think you should have it, but we're worried that if we give it to you, he will leave because you're a woman. And there's a chance that if we give it to him, you will stay. And that's exactly what happened. And he was a brilliant writer, and he wasn't fit for the actual detail of all of that, and he left after 9 months, and then I was made editor.
Fleur,
but that's the way it was.
It's quite shocking, really, but in the end, Nina did prevail. But what does this story tell us about the culture of the BBC, do you think?
Well, we've already seen quite recently Laura Kuenssberg accidentally send her briefing notes to Boris Johnson and have to cancel the interview because of that.
Cold, wouldn't you?
So I do think that they kind of need to get this under control, and if he's going to be the example where he has made a mistake and maybe said some unkind things and sent it to her, then he is going to have to take the consequences of that. I don't think it's a sexist thing, to be honest. I think he is in the wrong and should face the consequences. What is slightly annoying is that now that they're doing alternate days, there are now 2 more employees to go on with them, and that's just more licence fee payer money on their salaries.
Neil, I think this is a bad look for the BBC, with presenters reportedly going on strike. They won't be in the same building at the same time. You know, this isn't, some sort of Hollywood set. This is, a news channel paid for by licence fee payers. Don't you think there should be a bit more professionalism?
What I can tell you is in private industry, there was no way something like this would be allowed to happen, because your job is to do your job and you get on with it. And whatever is going on between them, you tell them to sort it, or they both go. That's the truth of it. And what you don't do And I've got to say that I've known Tony Livesey for years.
He did edit the Daily Sport, didn't he? So did you know him from Fleet Street days?
Yeah, I knew him from Fleet Street days. I don't think we ever worked on the same newspaper, but in that world, you do sort of run across each other. And the thing about him was, I remember when he made the decision to leave newspapers, where he was on a bit of a gilded path, because he actually at that time made a financial success of the Daily Sport. And he was projected for good things. But he made the conscious decision to go into radio. And in all the time I knew him, he was the most gentle man. He was never an aggressive bloke. He was never, if you listen to him on the radio, he was never the one putting the hard questions. He was excellent at dealing with the viewers, etc. So I suspect what you see is, yet again, BBC do not know how to manage. You've got such a terrible history of management cock-ups at the BBC. And what they don't do, one of the big problems that you don't really see in the private industry media, is they are so caught up with the diversity politics, the woke politics. Are we allowed to see a man winning over against a woman? No, the woman has to win, whether or not she's got the same track record as him. Yeah. I'm not saying at all that she's not a perfectly good presenter, but the truth is, get on and do your job. You're being paid by the licence fee, by the public.
Well, I think we'll come back to this at 10:30. Let me tell you that, a lot of this is reported in The Sun. We can't stand up the fact that Claire said this, Tony said that. These are just allegations at the moment, but it's clear that the two are not on air together at the moment, and I think it's a crying shame if a talent like Livesey gets shunted to the graveyard slot. What do you think? gbnews.com/your say.